Talk to me about the high points of your career as DA.
Wow, high points. You know, you kind of go in ebb and flow. That's probably, you know, I think the low points are probably when you are not able to get what you perceive to be justice for a particular victim. When you're not able to, you know, we have several unsolved cases that are out there that I can see, if I give it 2 seconds of thought, I can see those crime scenes in my mind, you know, that I've been to and lived through and everything else, and it just, you know, I think probably I hate that they're not solved, that they're not solved during my tenure, that I'm not able to at least put those in front of a jury and let them decide guilt or innocence on a particular case. And so I think those are probably the low points that you get. The high points are every time that you are able to stand up for a victim who didn't have a voice, and, you know, be that voice for them in the courtroom. I've had unbelievable opportunities to meet. You know, I always talk about little kids that have more courage in their little finger than I have in my whole body. You know, and are able to stand up and you know, do a very scary thing and talk about something that nobody should have to talk about, much less a kid. And so I think those are probably the high points, you know, when you're able to, you know, to get justice for somebody who, you know, you've kind of fought long and hard for. That's always a good thing. You know, we've never kept track of, I can't tell you, you know, a specific number of cases I've tried or anything else like that. I got a ballpark number, but it's not about wins or losses or anything like that. It's about getting justice for some of these victims, and so I think every time you're able to do that, that's always a high point.
Hardest case for you to prosecute?
You know, again, I think it's not, there's not one that I would say, well, that was absolutely the hardest case I've ever tried. I think it goes back, you know, for several years all I did was kid cases and rape cases, and those were very hard. You know, as funny as it may sound, I always say that rape is the hardest case, you know, that you're ever going to deal with. It not only affects the victim, it affects the victim's parents, the victim's brothers, sisters, friends, everybody, and they live with it forever. You know, this is a guy that's tried, you know, I've tried in the neighborhood of 70 to 80 murder cases. There's some finality to that. As horrible as that sounds, or at least this part of the, you know, that crime is over, there's some finality, you can start the healing process. With rape cases, you know, you live with those for your whole life, and your family and friends live those for their whole lives. And so, you know, I think those are probably the hardest cases. And when you deal with those cases involving kids, it doubles the difficulty of them. You know, when I became a dad, those became worse and worse because you know, you can't help but trying to see your own kids, you know, in those crimes. And you know, I just, again, have had the opportunity to meet some unbelievable people in the worst of circumstances. And so I think those are probably the hardest. They may not be, as far as evidence and everything else, as far as being hard or difficult to get ready or try, or, you know, because we've tried some very complex cases involving some complex issues. And so those are hard as far as the cases, getting them ready and preparing and trying them and everything else like that. But, you know, seeing a kid hurt and seeing a victim of rape hurt, those are probably as difficult of cases that you'll ever deal with.
Your best memories? Oh, again. I'm not even talking.
You're fogging up. Terry, you're fogging up the camera.
Oh, okay. Your best memories?
Best memories. Wow. You know, gosh, you know, I think it's the people that I've had the opportunity to work with and the people I've had the opportunity to meet. You know, I've had you know, I always kind of kid about, you know, I ran 3 different times. First time I had an opponent, and so, you know, I had to have a full-out campaign, and people say, well, that was miserable. But, you know, and I laugh and say, you know, that was pretty, I really enjoyed that process. I didn't like it when something negative was said or something not true was said. But I got to meet some of the best people, some of my closest friends during that process. You know, total strangers helped me like I would have never guessed, and are lifelong friends now. And so, you know, just starting that process, I got to meet lots of people. Talking in the community, and you know, as many times as I've done, you know, I had no idea how many Rotary clubs and Lions clubs and 1,000 other clubs there are in Lubbock, Texas. And I've talked to, I think, every one of them at least once, probably more, you know, more like 5 or 6. And so, you know, I've got to meet thousands of people in this job. And, you know, what drives Lubbock so much is its people in this community that will do anything for you. You know, that are as hardworking and you know, down to earth, good folks that you're ever going to meet. And so probably the highlights have been, you know, all the people, you know, all the officers I've got to meet that, you know, we every now and then you have 1 or 2 officers that do something stupid or commit a crime, and we take a step back. But you know, my experience has been 99.9% of the men and women who serve the community in Lubbock in law enforcement do it for the right reasons. They want to help folks, they want to serve their community, and that's been my experience. And I've met some unbelievable officers during my time, and have close friends with lots of officers and lots of victims and people in the community. So those are the highlights. The people are the highlights.
All right. What's been your motto in your career up to this point?
Do the right thing for the right reasons is probably as simple as it gets. And, you know, it's amazing how if you follow that adage, you're never going to get in much trouble. You know, I know people have disagreed with decisions I've made throughout the years, but I can tell you 100% that I've tried to do what's right on each and every case that I've dealt with. In each and every decision I've made, I've tried to use that adage. You know, my dad told me many, many years ago, don't ever do anything that your mom will be embarrassed to read in the Emerald Globe News, you know. And I'm still scared of my mom, I'm not really, but I really, you know, you know, that kind of, again, you know, we've always tried to bend over backwards to avoid even the appearance of any impropriety. And we've always tried to do the right thing on each and every case. You've never heard us criticize a jury. You've never heard us criticize a judge, ever. We're never going to do it publicly. You know, we all come in here and we may get mad about some ruling or something like that, but we're never, ever going to criticize a jury and a judge. Those are hard jobs, especially a jury. We thrust those folks in the situations they never wanted to be in. And so, you know, for the most part, I think they've done a tremendous job. And so, yeah, that's a long-winded lawyer answer to your question, but it's amazing how simple that statement can be. And I tell that to every baby lawyer and every staff member we hire, is always do the right thing for the right reasons. And if you follow that, you're never going to have any trouble. I mean, you're going to have trouble, but you're always going to be able to justify it. You're always going to be able to explain why you're doing something.
That's true. Okay. A couple of cases during your time, of course, gained national attention. The Saunier murder cases, of course, Dateline 2020, 48 hours, all those national guys being right there in the courtroom with you. The families always had something nice to say about you from those cases. On national TV. How does that make you feel? Not just locally, but nationally in that spotlight?
Well, you know, it always makes you feel good when your families support you. And, you know, in the thousands of cases that I've dealt with, I can count on one hand the number of times a family and I have not been on the same page. And it's never been, you know, just fight out, you know, tooth and nail, fight about something. They may want to do a different punishment than we want to do. They may want to seek a death penalty and we don't, or vice versa. We may want to seek a death penalty. Usually what happens on those cases, we've wanted to seek a death penalty and the family didn't want to do it. And, you know, we've deferred to the family on those almost every time. And, you know, my deal a long time ago was, you know, how the number one important thing to me, I talk for a living, that wasn't a very good statement.
It's okay.
The most important thing to me was always how we were going to deal with victims. And that was to communicate with them and be honest with them. It's amazing how if you sit down and have a communication, have a conversation with, all they want is information. And they want to feel like they're being handled correctly, their case is being handled correctly, and that it's important. And we forget, you know, we picked this job to do this job. Every victim had zero desire to be part of this process. And so, you know, their experience is not like ours. It's not by choice, it's by being forced into that situation. And so it was real important to me on how we're going to treat victims. And I always said, I use the Clint Eastwood, you know, demonstration. I'm going to tell them the good, the bad, and the ugly. There's going to be zero surprises on everything that we do. And if you're honest with them, they respect that. And most of the time, you're going to have a good relationship with the victims. And it's always good to know that the victims say something nice, but most of the time it's me saying something nice about the victims. Because again, I've had tremendous support from victims over the years. In the 26 years I've done this, you know, the thousands and thousands of victims have given us nothing but support. You know, again, we've been on opposite pages sometimes on what the conclusion needs to be or what it was. But they understand because we've explained to them why certain things happen. And you know, and you just can't help but have empathy for these victims. You know, we're supposed to take the emotional part out of it and try to do an analysis on what we think is going to happen. That's extremely hard to do because you're dealing with human lives. And so, you know, it's always good when they're saying something nice. And that's important to us because of how we try to treat victims.
Rosendo Rodriguez, he agreed to that plea deal and changed his mind at the last minute and backed out. Of course, we know how all of that worked out, but how frustrating of a moment was that for you?
You know, believe it or not, it wasn't that frustrating because now I thought we were going to get the best of both worlds. You know, that's a long story on kind of how that took place, but when we discovered Summer's body and we started looking at Rosendo Rodriguez as far as him being responsible for that murder, you know, something. It's like you and everybody else that's done their job for a long time. You get hunches and you get gut feelings about things. And I remember going over to the PD and having a briefing about that case, and it was me and my chief investigator, Todd Smith. And Todd and I were walking back from the PD, and I looked at him and said, I think Rosendo had something to do with Joanna's disappearance. And he was like, really? And I said, yeah, I just feel that way. And so, you know, I called his lawyer and said, I'm not saying your guy had anything to do with Joanna's disappearance, but if he did, and he tells us, and we're able to find her, then I'll waive the death penalty on Summer's case and let him plead to life without parole. And make a long story short, a couple of days later he called me. He told law enforcement what happened, that he had killed her, put her in a suitcase, threw her in a dumpster like a piece of trash. And you know, and that was the end of that. You know, the real heroes were the men and women who endured 100-degree weather in hazmat suits and dug through 2 years of garbage in a area that was about 2 football fields deep and 2 years full of garbage. And it was a miracle that we were able to find Joanna. I still get emotional about that. Yeah. Sorry. It's hard enough when you lose a child, much less not knowing where that child is unimaginable. And so when we were able to bring Johanna home to her mom and dad and have her a proper burial in a place where they knew she was, I remember going to that funeral and how important that was. And so that was really a big deal. You were asking about highlights. That was a big highlight for me. Not that there was cheering or celebration, but it was real important for us to bring her home to her mom and dad. And so we stood by our agreement. I'm going to let him plead to life without parole. And I always said his dad walked him into the death chamber because his dad, who was a lawyer in Wichita Falls, a defense lawyer, told him, act like you're crazy and like you don't know what's going on and don't do that deal. It was a mistake. And so he came in and he told the jailers he was going to do it. And so he came in and acted like that. We withdrew the plea, or withdrew the offer and gave notice of intent to seek a death penalty right there. And so I say we got the best of both worlds. We were able to bring Joanna home, and we got the death penalty on a guy that was very deserving of the death penalty. He was a sociopath and a very dangerous individual. And so, not that there again was any celebration by that, but sometimes, you know, as hard as it is to say, there is the type of evil that's out there that needs to be stopped, and he certainly fit that bill.
Just a side note, the 3 women that were found out in the county, there were 3 prostitutes.
Yeah.
I know that Rosendo was probably too young for most of that.
Yeah. Carbajal and that bunch.
Yeah, that bunch. Do you think that we'll ever find, this is on the side, sorry, that just got me off track, but.
Well, we're going to find them. We're going to find who did it. You know, those are a couple, 3 unsolved cases that I'm seeing in my mind right now, and what was done to them, and the circumstances of their death. We have. I'll tell you this, and I don't want to talk too much about it because they're still pending, but we have evidence that if we find the right individual, we're going to be able to prove that case. There's some common threads between 2 of them at least, and so if we are able to find the right individual, or he is forced to give a DNA sample or something in the penitentiary, say for instance, we'll find that right individual.
We just talked about that, so.
Yeah, we got DNA on that.
Good.
Yeah.
Any regrets? Would you have liked to have gotten longer sentences or more suspects punished in the Marquis Sasaga case?
Oh wow, you know, again, that's a case that is extremely frustrating, and I've had a really good relationship with Mark's mom over the years. And you know, it's just, I've always, you know, probably the biggest thing that's hurt me the most over the years is when people say, well, you don't want to try to do anything for whoever it may be. Or, I mean, I've spent my whole life standing up for victims and pursuing justice for victims of crime. And so when I've seen some of the, and believe it or not, I look at them. You know, my wife says, I can't believe you listen to something that somebody says in the paper or whatever. But because you know, I can tell you, we have and will continue to try to get justice for Mark on everything we can do. Yeah, you're always frustrated when you don't get the result that you think needs to happen on a particular case, and that's one of them. No question about it. But I can't change the evidence. I can't change the circumstances. I can't change the fact that we found him, you know, long removed from when he died, and that has, you know, that has ramifications on evidence and everything else. And I can't change the people that we have to deal with on that case. Doesn't mean it's right, doesn't mean that I'm satisfied with what's taking place, but it's just heartbreaking. Again, you know, when you talk about losing a child, there's nothing worse than that. And so you want to do everything you can to make sure that justice is done. And unfortunately, sometimes that doesn't happen. It's rare. I believe it's really rare. God loves justice. It's amazing, and whoever did that and all the circumstances will get justice. I believe that too, 100%. But earthly justice is different, and sometimes we're not able to get that.
In some of the murder cases and violent crimes, how much has meth played a part in the crime here?
It's played a part. Meth is, we'd never seen anything like meth before. Meth, and I always say meth and synthetic marijuana are probably the two biggest problems that we have, because it changes personalities and it changes people's behavior drastically. I mean, like night and day. Cocaine did that and does that to some extent. Alcohol does that to a lot, in a lot of situations. But meth, it's like I always say that meth plays a part just like any other substance does. We've had horrible crimes where alcohol has been an underlying factor. Horrible crimes when marijuana has been an underlying factor. Methamphetamine, amphetamine, cocaine, whatever. You fill in the drug of choice. And we've had horrible things happen because of all those things. When I talk to kids, I always say, there's two kinds of people in jail. There's good guys who did something bad, and there's bad guys who did something bad. But if you take a survey, they have two things in common, 90% of them. Number one, they probably didn't finish school, and number two, they have a drug or alcohol problem. And so almost every case we deal with has an underlying drug or alcohol problem with it. You're either using it, stealing money to get it, selling it, or you're taking and it causes your behavior to change, or it causes you to do something or become violent or whatever. And so almost every case we deal with has that, in its core, a lot of times that you'll have that there's a drug or alcohol issue there. Some guys are just mean and you don't have those issues. Some guys are just evil and you don't have those issues. But a lot of the cases that we deal with are going to have some underlying drug or alcohol issue.
Wow.
Yeah.
I guess I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
Of course, no city is immune to crime.
Yeah.
What type of crime do you think is Lubbock's biggest or growing issue?
Well, I think it's property crimes, burglary cases of not only vehicles, but construction sites, homes, those types of things. Our violent crime, even though our numbers have grown tremendously, our violent crime has gone down every year, which is the most important. But nobody's immune to it. My house has been burglarized twice. My barn has been burglarized. You don't have to prove them smart. That's never an issue. I don't know how wise it is to burglarize the DA's house, but my wife's car's been burglarized and her checkbook stolen and hot checks written off of that. So nobody's immune to it. And it's amazing. You'll have, we've changed the punishment for those crimes, especially burglary of a vehicle. It used to, you break in somebody's car, you used to go to the penitentiary for that. Well, now, I mean, you've really got to do a whole lot to get there now, because we've given that such a low degree of punishment and everything else. I'm not saying every car burglar needs to go to the pen, but it should be an option, because you have a guy that may commit 50 car burglaries before he's caught. And then, you kind of give him a slap on the wrist and he's back out committing 50 more burglaries. And so, those property crimes are probably as big an issue as that we face in Lubbock County, as far as the numbers that we've seen grow up. Violent crimes going down, which is, if you have to pick, that's what you want. You want those going down, but I think Lubbock is a tremendously safe place to live. If you look at how they justify numbers and everything else, counties our size, we're the safest county in the state of Texas. And the litmus test to me is, do you feel safe walking your dog at night? I think most people would say yes to that question, and so I think that's a pretty good litmus test. Nobody's immune, and we're county now around 350,000, I think, and so you're going to have some sorry people in that when you have that many people that are not going to work for a living. They're going to try to take shortcuts and commit crimes, and so. But I think Lubbock is a tremendously safe place to live.
Any frustrations that some murder cases maybe haven't gone to a trial or a plea? Take Samson Oguntope, excuse me. He's still in the Lubbock County Jail, more than 6 years now, after being arrested for murder and slavery.
Well, actually, he's in Vernon, is where he's at. Is at the state hospital, trying to regain competency to stand trial. He's been in and out of mental competency for years. That's a frustrating case. That was a bad crime and a bad crime scene, and he is a guy that needs to be locked up for the rest of his life. The problem is the law says that you have to be mentally competent to stand trial, and he has not been. You talk about the victim's family. Both sets of victims' family on that have been tremendous. I would not be as patient as they have been. They're great people and have been great to work with. And it's extremely frustrating, to answer your question, that he hasn't at least been, put in front of a jury to stand trial. It's not because anybody's not trying, but they get him competent. He comes back to the Lubbock County Jail. A month later, he's incompetent, and so they're sending him back to Vernon for more treatment and stuff like that to get competency. He's clearly got some mental health issues, and more so than that are the cases. There's probably the one that haunts me the most. There was a mom and her 3 kids that were killed, 11 or so years ago over on MLK. As bad a crime scene as I've ever been to. I can understand. You're in the drug dealing business. You may get hurt. You cheat on your wife. You may get hurt. You put yourself in a position, in a bad situation. You may get hurt. But how somebody could intentionally take the life of a child is beyond my comprehension. And to take the life of 3 kids in the fashion that their lives were taken, extremely brutal, is beyond belief. That one haunts me more than probably a lot of them do. I think about that one a lot, and I hope they'll appoint me special prosecutor when they find the guy who did that crime, because I'd love to come back and try it.
Yeah, I can imagine. We kind of touched on this the last time we talked. Of course, you have kids and a wife at home.
Yeah.
Dealing with some of the things that you mentally have to comprehend and process and that kind of stuff, how important has that family unit been in these years?
There's 2 things I say to that. Number one is my faith. I don't know how anybody could do this job without faith. To know that there's a better hope for this world than what we see on a day-to-day basis here. I have no doubt about that in my mind. And so that is the number one thing that keeps me sane. The second is my wife and my kids. My wife is my number one, my best friend, my number one supporter, my number one critic, my number one whatever. And my number one sounding board. I ran lots of ideas past her and lots of closing arguments past her. And she has supported me through the good and the bad and the ugly, so she is clearly, she's the toughest person I know. She's the strongest person I know. She's the hardest working person I know. and she's been and has faith, 10 times better than me, and so she has been absolutely the most important thing in my job. My kids, I've been blessed with tremendous kids that haven't ever really given me any trouble, that have gone on to do great things. And my son's getting married next July. We love going to be our future daughter-in-law, and so their life is very good as far as my kids are concerned. They're healthy, which is the most important thing, and they're doing very well.
I know because, well, every once in a while we talk at home.
Right.
That we're really hoping for and waiting for a judgeship.
Well, I'll put it to you this way. My last year and a half has been an unbelievable experience. I actually put in for the U.S. Attorney job, is what I did. And then the two senators asked me if I would consider being a judge. It's hard to tell two United States senators no. And so they told me that was going to happen, and the White House told me twice it was going to happen. And for whatever reason, it's not going to. I'm okay with that. I truly believe God has a plan for my life, whatever it is, even at my age. And so, it's kind of a blessing probably, because I like being in the game a little too much and to be a referee. And that may change, in a couple of years or something, but I really like being one of the players instead of being the referee. And so I think, I don't know how happy I would have been in that job anyway. It was a tremendous honor to be even considered. I mean, I can't believe that, how that was even considered. West Texas boy from Lubbock and Amarillo, Texas, but it just wasn't meant to be, and I'm fine with that. I was disappointed at the time, but I've moved on, and we're looking forward instead of backwards now.
Yeah, and you got a great opportunity in front of you.
Yeah, it was one that I never ever wanted to leave Lubbock. Lubbock is home. My church is here, my friends are here, my kids were born here, everything I know is here. But just the opportunities I had, I just didn't think it was a good fit, or for whatever reason. And so this kind of came across the board, and I'm attracted to it in the sense that I get to be with a lot of people still. That's kind of what I like to do, and then you throw in 27,000 kids to the mix, and you get to help maybe shape kind of the future of their lives and try to make them better. And the new challenges. There's going to be new challenges, stuff that I hope I'm able to comprehend and do. I've done this for so long. I hope I'm able to get up to speed on those things. But I'm looking forward to it. I wish it was in Lubbock, Texas, just because Lubbock's home. But Lubbock will always be home, and I don't know where we'll be in 2 years or a year or 5 years. I have no idea. But this is where our roots will be, I think, no matter what.
Very true. Last question. Any advice to Sunshine and your staff?
We talked about it before, and it's that advice of always doing the right thing for the right reasons. I think that probably sounds corny to a lot of people, but I mean, think about that and applying that to everything that you do every day, whether it's a decision you're going to make, how you're going to treat somebody, how you're going to treat a judge, a defense lawyer, a victim, a citizen, an officer. Everything that if you apply that to everything that you deal with, and I haven't done that every day. I've lost my temper. I've lost. I'm I'm an emotional guy, and so when I perceive something I think is wrong, I kind of let's go and see what happens. But I've got better at that. You know, the grayer I get, the calmer I get. You know, I think that's the best advice that you can give somebody. You know, I had a great mentor outside of my dad. Bill Souter was an unbelievable, you know, friend and boss, and so I had a good teacher on those issues. And that Bill restored integrity to this office when it was desperately needing it, and I would hope I was a part of that and have strengthened that since you know, since I took office. And so you know, again, very simple adage, but when you apply it to the things that you do, you know, it kind of holds true.